Have you ever seen someone with so much aura and effortless riz that he could get away with literally anything? That's basically our handsome MC, Lewis. His life was joyful and full of adventure until one day when he got sick and died. It seemed like that was the end of his story, but suddenly he woke up again, but as a skeleton. Even that wasn't the end of his story. The demon queen who wanted to kill him couldn't resist the beauty of such a handsome man. Now they will search for his body together. How did it all begin? Let's find out. Long ago, when humanity was pushed to the brink of extinction at the hands of monsters, a mage appeared to gloriously save everyone from annihilation. He resorted to using magic that came with the ultimate price tag. It cost him his life force. This morbid power was called black magic. The hero successfully warded off evil and triumphantly returned to a fitting hero's welcome. He was the man who prevented humanity's extinction after all, but his story ended tragically. Under the evil eyes of his fellow humans, the hero was sentenced to death. Before he was sent to the afterworld, the hero left one final sentiment. Before the guillotine severed his head, he cast a curse that would change the world after his passing. When the hero was put to death, peace came to the world. Our story begins 100 years after that dark day in history, in a quaint little village called Floss. On its outskirts was a place where flowers bloomed under the sun, watered and cared for by a certain someone. Lying down in the garden of greenery was a blonde man complaining that Violet had been hanging out near his house again. The violet-haired woman named Violet simply asserted that she came by to water the flowers. The man had no qualms about that. What he found annoying was being included in the watering process too. Wiping off the water from his face, the light of the sun hit at just the right angle to accentuate his ethereal beauty. Floss Village was your typical medieval town, bustling with the hubbub of everyday life. You could see children playing, guards patrolling, merchants negotiating, beggars begging, and even orcs walking around. Inside one of the taverns, people were quietly whispering while stealing glances at the table where the blonde stud was dining. Women would look in his general direction and forget how to function. The bald owner would come by his table and shyly hand over the piping hot order of steak. He cautiously asked the blonde man he referred to as Lord Lewis if the food was up to his taste, and Lewis approved. While the owner was serving him, the chatty baldy whispered some news about some sort of troubling epidemic crippling the next village over. Mr. Owner was feeling kind of troubled by the news, as he had some friends in the next village. His conspiracy theory was that this epidemic was caused by the hero's curse from a century ago, but Lewis highly doubted that. However, even Floss Village was starting to feel quite different from usual. Louis asked if the epidemic had anything to do with the change. Mr. Owner broke out into a song, singing that the only epidemic in the tavern was an epidemic of love, thanks to Lord Lewis's presence. Our boy was not too fond of that musical stuff, threatening to leave if he heard any more nonsense. Finally, he was left alone to enjoy his food in peace, free to chew on the tender meat. That peace did not last too long as an elf girl came up to him to ask a question. With a cheerful smile, she asked Louis if he was eating with someone or just by himself. It was just that one of her guild members, the brunette sitting across the table, wanted to confess that she had a little crush on Louis. Elf girl asserted that this was the first time the brunette had ever liked someone. If it would be acceptable to Louis, they would like to invite him out and have a few drinks with the ladies. His answer shocked the girls. The Gigachad asked them how much they were willing to pay to get him to come. Well, he gets paid to eat in this tavern, so ugly girls will have to pay extra if they want to invite him for drinks. Without any hint of sarcasm or irony, Louis brushed his hair and complained about how hard it was for his mental state to constantly look so good. Instead of being pissed off, the elf girl was stunned by his radiance. She did not feel sad or angry at all for some reason. She even felt sorry for trying to be brave enough to talk to Louis. Embarrassed, she just wanted to run away and hide elsewhere. Just like that, the elf girl stumbled out of the tavern door, ashamed of showing her face to Louis. With an exhausted sigh, he just couldn't catch a break with all the BS. Of course, he felt like he was being a tad too mean to that girl. But if he doesn't treat them like that, crazy things could happen. One time, there was a crazy lady who pulled out a knife on him, asking why he was playing with her feelings for allegedly winking in her direction. She interpreted it as him wanting to have a child with her when he just winked because of some dust in his eyes. Sure, there are times when his good looks have led him to some scary situations, but the thrill of being supremely handsome was the best. He wouldn't exchange it for anything in the world. His face card literally never declines. People always wanted to know where he goes and what he eats. Admirers would line up to get a glimpse of what clothes he would choose. They pretty much follow every single thing that he does. On the streets of Floss Village, the sight of villagers walking alongside him, seeking his approval for copying his whole flow, was an everyday thing. Some hardcore fans would be happy just to shake his hands. They treated it as a lifelong dream, but he always refused. Sometimes, particularly pesky fanatics would cry, beg, and cling to Lewis's feet just to get a chance at a handshake. His life was interesting, to say the least. Suddenly, he bumped into that annoying party of girls once again. Calling him God-given handsome Louis, he was widely known by that nickname after all. The brunette found him very interesting. It's rumored that he earned an invitation to the Imperial City just because of his looks, but ultimately rejected it. Only a stupid person would do that. But that fact only made the brunette even more interested and attracted to the good-looking enigma. She proclaimed her willingness to forget their first meeting so they could have a drink. He answered by asking who the hell she was. He didn't even remember this brunette from the tavern. She looked like one of those people begging to shake his hands. It was annoying and tacky. Infuriated that she did not even register in his memory, the brunette swore to never forget this. She laughed maniacally and gestured to draw her sword to strike him down, only to be stopped by the grip of a muscular hand. The brunette turned around to see who would dare to stop her in a moment of anger, her hostility ballooning. It was one of Lewis's fans, the muscular girl shyly asking him for a handshake from earlier. She was not happy that this witch was threatening her beloved. Miss Brunette backed off at the sight of such an imposing frame. After a brief moment of silence, Muscle Girl told her to stop clinging to Lewis and piss off. The brunette immediately retreated to her party, afraid of what might happen if she tried anything funny. Before running away with her tail tucked between her legs, the devious witch gnashed her teeth and formulated a plan. While Lewis gave Muscle Girl her dream of a handshake, the brunette was thinking that if she couldn't have him, then no one should. Also, Lewis asked Muscle Girl how much she could lift. The day passed, and a peaceful night came. Outside of Lewis's house, there were a few figures sneakily circling the area. Some plebs were watching Lewis sleep through the bedroom window, deluding themselves that they were much more handsome than the sleeping blondie. I'll leave it up to you if they were telling the truth or not. Do these bald bastards look handsome to you? They were random thugs that the brunette contracted to kill Lewis, with the promise of a date as compensation. The rest of the party wasn't quite sure that they should go this far, thinking that they should just leave. But the brunette's mind was made up long ago. If they weren't going to help, they should just step out of the way. If she couldn't have Louis, the psycho would gladly have him killed so no one else could. Turning to the thugs, she smiled and asked them to make the killing quick and easy. But instead of murderous maniacs, she just saw murdered maniacs. The thugs were bleeding out on the floor, lifeless. Then came a succession of thuds from behind. When the brunette turned around, she saw her party members lying on the floor, motionless. Unsure and scared of what was going on, she felt the glint of a knife touching her neck. An aura akin to a death god held the terrified witch in place. Whoever this assailant was, they were inhumanly quick. The brunette could not even sense her after neutralizing 4 targets in a span of a few seconds. In such a rural area as Floss Village, there shouldn't be anyone with this level of skill. The brunette asked who the unknown expert was and why she was being targeted. Craning her neck to look at the mystery killer, she was hit with a sudden realization. The one holding the blade was none other than Violet. Sweating profusely from the tension, the brunette continued playing stupid, asking why Violet was doing this. Done with her BS, Violet grabbed the witch by the hair and tugged down. Violet was a firm believer that flowers are only meant to be looked at and admired from afar. No one deserves to pluck a beautiful flower, let alone someone as impure as the pesky witch. Violet's advice for her next life was to just look at the flowers, never entertaining the thought of plucking them. While 5 people were being murdered outside his house, Lord Louis was peacefully sleeping in his bed. The morning came, and it was back to business as usual. No traces of the killing remained. Violet was up early, waiting outside the house to greet Lord Louis with a good morning. Well, she was not exactly up and early, as she never even went to bed after the incident last night. She was patiently watering the flowers just as she had done yesterday. If you took a closer look, you would see some human limbs poking out of the ground. Violet asserted that she was just worried for the flowers as they almost died last night. Changing the subject, Violet urged Louis to go down to the village as they were on track to run out of money soon. She proposed that he try working just to do something productive as a hobby, but Louis did not enjoy the hassle of jobs. If he could, he would just keep living and lying down on the grassy plain, soaking in the sun forever. He would gladly do so for 10 years or even 20 years from now. At this point in time, he thought that life would be full of happiness and bliss. But a month later, everything would change. He would visit the once busy Floss Village, only to find a ghost town. The streets were practically empty, and the tavern was filled with the lifeless remains of the people who used to follow him around. In hindsight, he shouldn't have gone to the village in the first place. He recalled the rumors of an epidemic that the owner mentioned to him before. It was the only explanation that made sense. His little visit to the village had been the beginning of the end, as he contracted the mysterious illness. It did not take too long for the sickness to spread. Violet never left his side, crying her eyes out as he came to the realization that life had been so pointless. He was still in his prime, still young and handsome. He could have enjoyed a life of peace with just his face until he died of old age. But now, he was about to be killed by the sickness. Fate can be unfair sometimes, don't you think? Tears welled up in his eyes as he succumbed to the sickness that he had no control over. Seeing as the remaining bits of life drained from his body, Violet refused to accept Lord Lewis's tragic end. As Violet's pleas quieted down, Louis reckoned that he had finally died. In the middle of the vast nothingness, he awakened the special feature of the Black Magician's descendant to resist death. Sounds returned, his senses slowly coming back. He opened his eyes to a clearing of trees lit up by the bright moonlight in the starry skies. He sat up with a beating headache, asking himself if what he just experienced was nothing but a dream. If it was, it really was a crappy one. Standing up and stretching his arms, he believed that he would never die from such a silly illness. The first thing he did was draw his blade to check out his handsome face after a good night's rest. He was about to go on with his tirade about his brilliant looks, but stopped when he saw the reflection on the blade. An image of a skeleton was reflected in his eyes. a face that he could not recognize. Realizing what was happening, Louis fell to his knees, his thoughts racing a million miles a minute. The peerless, handsome lord had become a skeleton soldier with measly stats and the title of a bastard. A few years ago, a whopping 486 A-rank knights were dispatched to participate in a raid to conquer a single dungeon. Despite the record-breaking quantity and quality of the army, it still resulted in total annihilation. The boss in charge of the dungeon was one that even S-rank knights would struggle against. It was the Shadow Lord known as the Black Dragon Aatrox, a force of nature stronger than anything that humanity had ever encountered. At least, that was what the following army heard. But the scene in front of them was far from the depictions of death and destruction. A blonde man approached the beast and made it swoon like a schoolgirl. This was Lord Louis's power when he actively flirted with any creature. The terrifying beast was practically blushing and fuming with love at the sight of his handsome face. Who would have thought that the dragon who killed hundreds of powerful knights would roll on its back, seemingly asking to be petted? The leader of the party did not regret spending an astronomical sum to recruit Louis. His presence alone was worth every penny. He had seen Louis's potential before, and thought that it would not work against the Black Dragon. But it did. Some veterans had undergone bizarre raids and campaigns for decades, and they had never seen anything like what Louis was doing. There was no magic involved, as even the highest level magic could not scratch the scales of the Black Dragon. What Louis had was something nobler and more powerful than magic. His unique weapon was his overwhelming beauty, aura, and riz. They had arranged to send some of the greatest fighters in the world, and they were upstaged by a pretty boy. Saying that Louis was good-looking was a gross understatement. With his face as his weapon, he was paid at the rate of an outstanding S-rank mercenary for situations like this. As the dragon licked his face, he chuckled at the wealth and honor he was effortlessly accumulating. If he had those looks, nothing else mattered. But now, his only redeeming quality had been taken away. His flesh and beautiful skin had literally rotted away into a skeleton. While he was lamenting his situation, some territorial goblins confronted him for messing around in their turf. The first ugly thing he saw upon waking up was calling him absolutely disgusting. It even spat on his skull for additional disrespect. Realizing that he was in trouble, Louis ran while still refusing to accept his situation, convincing himself that this was a dream. Moreover, goblins should not even be in the woods. They are a species known for staying inside dungeons. He stopped in his tracks, proclaiming that the great Louis was not the type to run away from trash mobs. The Louis he was would never crumble over something like this. So he turned around with his dagger in hand, determined to survive the goblins somehow. Sure, he was terrible at fighting, but fighting a goblin or two should be easy, right? He was not right. The goblins caught up and immediately bashed his skull with their crude weapons, cracking his head. They proceeded to gang up on him, kicking and bashing his skeletal body. This is what happens when you try to be brave when you have never been in a fight before. The great Louis was now being treated like a punching bag by a bunch of goblins. He recalled the last time he encountered goblins. A whole army stood before him as he smiled and commanded a party of high-ranking adventurers to wipe out the entire lair. That was how he rolled back then. How the mighty have fallen. Now, he looked utterly disgusting and in pain from all the beatings. This would have continued had there not been a surprise arrow burying itself inside one of the goblins' heads. A human wearing heavy armor followed suit, catching the remaining goblins off guard. With a single swing of his blade, goblin blood painted the ground. Louis just lay there, confused as to what was happening. An adventurer party came in clutch, thinking they were saving another human, only to see a skeleton. They thought the goblin bastards had devoured all the flesh of the poor guy. Their priest dedicated a prayer for the cruelty of the world they live in. Meanwhile, Louis was just struggling to get up because his joints hurt. Just as they were about to pay their respects to the dead, Louis got up and thanked them for the save. He even invited them for a meal together as payment for saving his life. Instead of the usual praise he used to get, he got his head chopped off instead. Afterward, the party retreated. They had never heard of a talking skeleton, so they thought Louis was a demon that the nearby villagers must be wary of. Even being beheaded was not enough to extinguish his life. Perhaps the next best move would be to go back home first. After a long journey, Louis managed to find his way back to the outskirts of Floss Village, his home. It used to be, at least. Right now, the village had been turned into ruins. Maybe the epidemic had something to do with the village's destruction, and he was not dreaming after all. Walking to the garden on the village outskirts, all of the beautiful flowers had long since withered. Violet's house still looked intact, albeit a little neglected. Curious, he slowly pushed the door open to take a look inside. It was unlocked, and the smell of alcohol was present inside. Maybe someone else had moved in. As far as he could recall, Violet couldn't handle her liquor, and she didn't drink. Whoever was staying inside the house found a skeletal intruder and mounted a sneak attack, blade in hand. It was none other than Violet. If Louis still had flesh, his arm would have been stabbed and torn. Based on the smell and the blush on her face, she looked pretty drunk. She looked like a complete wreck, but she could still kick ass when completely wasted. One kick was all it took to send the skeleton flying into the walls. Her blade managed to tear off the arm that was still freakishly moving. She was only behaving like this because she did not recognize him. The Violet he knew was never this fierce, so maybe something happened while he was gone. While the murderous woman marched to finish him off, Louis tried to talk her down. She did not listen and vanished on the spot. When she reappeared, Violet's blade was placed against Lewis's neck, asking him to identify himself. A monster cannot act like a human. That was common sense. So why in the world was this skeleton capable of conversing clearly? As soon as the skeleton introduced himself as Louis, something inside Violet snapped. He continued to assert that he did not know what happened either. But upon waking up, he had turned into this ugly monster. Having none of that implausible story, Violet grabbed and threw him to the floor. He tried to get up but was pushed down by her monstrous strength once again. With pure rage and murder in her eyes, she aimed her blade at the skeleton's skull. She would never forgive a monster that would dare to imitate her beloved. She intended to turn this skeleton into powder. Louis panicked and doubled down, insisting that he really was Louis. Before the blade could lodge deep into his cranium, he screamed that he was Flower, the nickname she had given him long ago. Violet recalled the time when she would tease Louis by watering him to make the man bloom. One time, he asked Violet why she kept on calling him Flower. Her reasoning was simple and pure. In her eyes, Louis was the most beautiful flower in the land. From then on, Louis had never opposed the nickname. He even grew to like it eventually. Instead of the blade, Violet's tears started coming down. She lost her grip and the knife dropped. The murderous woman was gone. There was only the lonely Violet being given hope that her beloved was still alive. The sun had risen, and she hugged Louis' skeleton body, missing him dearly. She explained that it had been a year since Louis supposedly passed, and a lot had happened since then. He was not expecting to hear that he had been absent for an entire year. They were talking with their backs against one another, as Violet was still getting used to seeing the most handsome man in the world in such a dreadful form. While Louis was crying because his ego was bruised, Violet continued her story about how a demon appeared. Shocked by the revelation, Louis turned around, and she avoided looking at his bony face. She continued that a war broke out as soon as the demons attacked. Some kingdoms have already fallen. But Violet could not leave the outskirts of Floss Village, as this place was filled with memories of her beloved. And now, he just appeared out of nowhere, looking like a skeleton demon. His tone turned grave as he asked Violet if there was still a chance for him to go back to his old self. Turning around and smiling in return, Violet assured him that everything would be fine, as she knew a method to return him to his original appearance. The duo immediately set off on an adventure, with Louis resolved to do whatever it took to return to his previous self. He asked if she would still be willing to follow even if the road was filled with danger and peril. Violet did not even hesitate to answer that she was. It had always been her job to water the flowers after all. And so, Louis and Violet set out to find and get his beauty. Here is the text with corrections made according to your instructions. The solution that Violet put forth was the potion of regeneration, known for regenerating flesh instantly. Its recipe included the legs of a red spider, the tail of a blue lizard, and the blood of a green deer, all of which were easily obtainable. As for the last and most tricky ingredient, they would have to do some heavy hunting. The duo would need to defeat and loot the master of the lake, the monstrous Leviathan. Louis bravely stood at the shore with his dagger drawn, taunting the beast. He called the legendary beast an ugly fish bastard, and the provocation worked. Not in the way he expected, though. Leviathan just looked at him like he was insane. While Louis danced and taunted, Leviathan was certain this fool could be crushed with minimal effort. When the skeleton mockingly smiled and asked if the master of the lake was scared, Leviathan finally snapped. The beast opened its maw and charged at the swiftly retreating Louis. His job was pretty much done at this point. While luring Leviathan deeper onto land, he screamed for Violet to do her part. She finally showed up, jumping out of her hiding spot with dual blades equipped. Violet looked calm and focused to a terrifying degree. She looked like she could cut and kill anything. Realizing that he had foolishly overextended, Leviathan immediately knew he had messed up. He refused to believe he had been tricked by that dumbass skeleton. Whether he liked it or not, Violet's blade was not messing around. It was an easy kill. Under the sea of pink trees, Violet took out the successfully concocted potion of regeneration. Inside the vial was a red liquid with mystical properties that could heal all wounds after being blessed by the angels. Louis was not expecting the caveat that the potion only works in a place where cherry blossoms are blooming freely. It felt incredibly romantic. Taking the vial, Louis excitedly popped the cork, but was stopped before he could pour the liquid onto his body. Violet took one of her blades and made a tiny cut in her palm. Just to be on the safe side, she wanted to try the potion on herself first. Dropping a few drops on the cut, the effect of the potion was flashy and immediate. An angel with wings made of cherry blossom flowers descended from the heavens and gently touched her wound. Louis's mouth hung wide open at such a graceful sight. Deeming the potion safe for use, Violet excitedly handed the vial over to the skeleton. Seeing its effect in action made it feel real. Louis could feel the weight of the potion in his hand. He turned to Violet, expressing his gratitude as without her, he knew he would be nothing. For a second, Violet could see Louis's beauty accentuated by the falling flowers. Hearing and seeing the love of her life address her so tenderly made Violet's heart flutter. Louis proceeded to take the cork out, lifted the vial over his head, and steeled his resolve. He remembered the disgust of the monsters and people who looked at him in his skeleton form. He reflected on his pathetic life. Crying his eyes out even though he didn't have eyes, he shouted his desire to live as a true brat. Shattering the vial over his body, the precious potion of regeneration hit his skull and spread across the rest of his skeletal frame. After a few seconds of dreadful silence, instead of his flesh and skin returning, his bones melted into a pile of putrid rot. Violet immediately ran to his side, concerned about what might have happened. He didn't know what was happening either, but the arm he used to crush the potion had turned into mush, melted and corroded mush. The sound of his painful wails filled the sea of cherry blossom trees. Violet looked on in horror and pain as the man she loved lost hope. After losing the only chance he had to get his old life back, Lewis resorted to repeatedly bashing his head against the ground in pain and frustration. Seeing cracks forming along his skull, Violet tried to urge him to calm down. Hearing her tell him to calm down after feeling his dream go down the drain made it worse. Lewis was dejected. He was supposed to return to normal, and he didn't. Perhaps it was time to consider that he might have to live in this ugly form forever, when even a potion blessed by angels could not help. He angrily asked the powers that be what he had done so wrong to be punished like this. After anger came bargaining and hopeless questioning of whether he could ever go back to the way things were. If he's stuck in this form, then there is no point in continuing to live anymore. He was starting to entertain some pretty dangerous ideas regarding death. Violet couldn't give him an answer. She too was helpless and clueless about what to do next. Trying to stay positive, she wanted to believe that there must be another way. That was until they were interrupted by the landing of a supremely powerful presence. Violet immediately drew her dual blades and stood in front of Lewis, shielding him from whatever had just arrived. Keeping her eyes forward, she asked Louis to run away as far as possible. She recognized the red hair and the ominous horn, a terrifying presence that represented hopelessness. It had red eyes and sharp fangs akin to lethal daggers. With the aura of death and destruction, there was no mistaking it. The commander of demons, the Demon King, had just arrived. Violet wanted Lord Lewis to run while she bought some time to the best of her abilities, but the skeleton stepped forward to address the Demon King instead. He reckoned that the king of the demons must be supremely powerful, so he wanted to ask the beast a favor. Lewis wanted the Demon King to end his miserable life. Who would have thought that the Demon King was a queen instead? She found the skeleton an interesting guy for asking to be killed when he was already dead. That assessment was not 100% accurate though. He's neither truly dead nor alive, a truly strange existence. Nevertheless, the queen licked her lips and gladly accepted the skeleton's wish to cease existing. He hung his head low and quietly accepted what was about to happen. If he couldn't get back to his previous glory, he would rather end it all. Violet pulled him away and apologized for not respecting his wishes. He was confused as Violet pushed him away from the queen. She wanted to let him live and never forget that there are still people who want to protect him dearly. Chief among them was Violet herself. And so, the dual-wielding woman locked eyes with the commander of all demons. Two women possessing immense power faced off. The queen stretched her claw, which was filled with a miasma of death, and Violet responded by brandishing her blades to counterattack. She actually made the queen bleed, leaving a shallow wound along her collarbone. The surprise from being wounded made the queen halt for a second. She ran her claws along the wound with disbelief. She stared at the blood that ran across her chest in surprise. Then the queen's mouth curved up into an amused smile. The smile turned into maniacal laughter as her demonic power flared up to a higher degree. She took the wound as Violet's demand to be faced properly. One of her crimson eyes turned into an ethereal hue as Lucifer's Eye Awakening activated. Charging in with renewed fascination for the human woman, the queen attacked with her claws once again. Violet found the demon's movements too fast. She would have to devote all her attention to defending herself first. Even with her full attention on defense, the speed of the attack was still too quick to react to. One of her blades was cut in half, and a deep wound appeared across her chest. The Demon Queen's Lucifer eyes can see through the essence of the world. Blocking against such an overpowered vision was utterly useless. She fired off the miasma of death, spreading it all over the sea of cherry blossom trees. Blood flew everywhere, but it was not Violet's. The Demon Queen was wounded once more with a shallow cut to the cheek. The longer they fought, the more interested she became. Her unexpected attack was supposed to be undefendable, but not only did Violet dodge it with her raw instinct, but she even managed to sneak in a counterattack in a split second. It made the queen like Violet more and more, to the point of extending an invitation to become a subordinate. The queen asked why such a strong human as Violet would risk her life for just a lowly skeleton. She simply responded that she had made a promise to protect and water her flowers, and cheekily clapped back that a demon obsessed with slaughter would never understand the feeling of losing someone so precious. The queen's smile vanished as she was reminded of something she did not want to remember. Her offer to take on Violet as a subordinate was now off the table. From now on, she's going in with the full intent to kill. Knowing she does not stand a chance against the full power of such a powerful demon, Violet closes her eyes and quietly accepts her demise. But when she heard Louis's voice opposing the queen, she opened her eyes again. The lowly skeleton with meager stats stood in front of her, shielding her body with his own, and bravely raising his dagger against the queen of all demons. Instead of running away for dear life, Louis came back. He didn't know why he did so either, but he had nothing left to lose. Staring at the skeleton, the demon queen was blinded by a radiant light. She tried her best to get a glimpse of the source of the light and was shocked to see who was in front of her. For some reason, she could see something else through the lens of Lucifer's eyes. While Violet and Louis bickered, the Demon Queen could see the true essence of the clumsy skeleton soldier. While Violet and Louis bickered, the Demon Queen could see the true essence of the clumsy skeleton soldier, the face of the most beautiful man in the world. A few years back, in the ominous Demon King's castle, a structure suspended by the chains of hell on top of an upside-down mountain, the demons were once plunged into chaos when orders came down from the top that they were seeking peace with humans. A demon elder who looked like a duck asked the guardians of the castle what the commotion was all about. With their worldview as demons, a demon king should be a presence that terrorizes and slaughters humans. The duck elder explained that their demon king had lost her heart to a human when a demon falling for a human was unheard of. The cause of the sudden change in the demon king's heart was clear for all to see in the countless portraits placed all over the castle. Everything was connected to the man named Louis. Some thought it must be caused by some kind of magic, but the wise duck elder was certain it was not. In his hometown, they used to have a term for the demon king's odd behavior. It was referred to as fandom. The demon king had been smitten by the radiant beauty of the man named Louis to the point of obsession. Back to the present, the queen had dropped every bit of hostility she had emitted moments ago. She ran right into the skeleton's body, not to attack, but to put him in a tight embrace of love. The queen's tears flowed as freely as a waterfall as she professed just how much she missed her Lord Louis. Even the skeleton man was confused by this turn of events. Here's the corrected text. You see, for hundreds of years, there have only been 10 demon kings until now. It just happened that the most powerful among them was the current one. She was also referred to as the Black Dragon, Atrox, the same beast that Louis had tamed and flirted with back in the day. The demons have agreed that as long as Atrox the Black Dragon existed, it would only be a matter of time before humanity crumbles and demons rise to the top. But right now, that all-powerful being was crying her eyes out with joy after seeing her beloved human once more. Louis had to recount his experience since turning into his current form. Atrox did not stop crying for a second. She felt terrible that Louis had gone through such a hard time. Then she asked how he ended up in such a useless and absolutely unappealing body of a skeleton in the first place. He appreciated the concern, but the brutally honest roast still hurt. Atrox then told him not to worry about the search for a way to get his body back. She would gladly accompany him to help get that handsomeness back. Violet immediately opposed that idea as they could not trust a demon, but Louis would take any help he could get at this point. He wanted to know if the queen was serious first. Atrox swore that she was. She wanted to stand by his side as there were all kinds of dangers lurking around the human world. Also, she finds Violet too weak to protect him throughout the journey. Violet did not take that diss well at all. She was supposed to be the one who protects the flower, and Louis protects her life. Hearing such a ridiculous proclamation made Atrox gnash her teeth in anger. She asked why Violet had let Louis die such a miserable death in the first place. Unable to dispute the weight of the question, Violet could not say anything back. Atrox turned to Lord Louis and recognized the fact that it was hard for him to trust a demon like her. She brushed her hair behind her pointy ears and blushed as she put forth an idea to resolve the problem of trust. Louis could just sign a contract with her and become her master. He was confused about what this contract thing was about. Violet did not like the sound of Atrox referring to her flower as master. After a few minutes, an intense explosion of demonic energy disturbed the peaceful woods. Agreeing to a demon pact, Atrox would now accompany and assist Louis in restoring his past appearance. The penalty for a breach of contract would be soul annihilation. With the pact finalized, Atrox swore to do her best to help him in any way possible. She properly introduced herself as the Black Dragon Atrox, and he found it way too long to say. Since referring to her full name was quite tricky, he proposed changing the Demon Queen's name altogether. She was a demon but also a kind dragon ready to help. Louis racked his brain for a new fitting name. He eventually landed on calling her Dragony. That was the extent of his creativity and naming sense. You see, dragons have a family heirloom passed down through generations. There was a golden dragon, a female dragon, and a fire dragon. These names indicated their family line. The queen who inherited the name of the Black Dragon grew silent. Based on the smile and the blush on her cheek, it was obvious that she found Dragony a cute name. She did not care about her family heirloom. She preferred the name given by Louis. Jumping up and down with joy, she praised her new master. Now that everything had been settled, it was time to think of what they should do next. Feeling left out, Violet quietly pouted on the side. The three quickly formulated a plan to traverse the nearby desert lands. Their journey on foot was long and miserable, but they got close to the nearest city. Even though he had turned into a skeleton, the heat of the desert was still unbearable. The dryness felt like death itself. Violet came to his side to make sure that he was all right. He really was struggling. Just like him, Dragony was also struggling with the harsh weather of the desert. While sweat ran down all over her body in this hellish place, Violet was still feeling wary of the demon. She was supposed to be an entity that killed humans for fun, after all. Wandering around dangerous areas with a scheming demon made her feel uneasy. Louis flicked Violet on the forehead in response to her doubts. At this point, Louis did not care whether he was enlisting the help of a human or a demon. As long as they wanted to help him find his body, he was fine with it. Since assuming his current ugly form, every day had been hell. He understood that Violet was just worried about him. but worrying too much would not get them anywhere. Violet was there to help, and so was Dragony. Worrying about it too much would be useless. Violet was also starting to realize that her incessant complaints about the queen were shameless when all Louis needed right now was support. If she could not believe in this dumbass skeleton man, then who would? Violet steeled her resolve to just do her best. Recalling the scalding question of why she had let Louis die in the first place, Violet steeled her resolve to do her best to protect her flower this time around. She would be by his side to be his sword and shield. It took a few more hours of walking through the unbearable heat to reach their destination. The sun had set by the time they arrived at the place called Arcanus. It was a sprawling city carved inside a rocky mountain. The place was filled with a unique flavor of local architecture. Walking around the city, the trio stayed close together. The vibes were definitely off right from the get-go. Arcanus did not seem like a tourist-friendly place at all. Louis did not give a damn, though. He was locked in to find his body. Violet reminded him not to stray too far, as Arcanus was a dangerous city. Dragony butted in to talk trash about Violet for being an inadequate helper. She clung to Louis and promised to be the one to protect him at all times. They had come here to obtain some clues regarding methods of getting Louis's body back, and Violet happened to be very good at that. Louis asked Violet about their plans now that they had ventured so far, and she was delighted by the attention, unlike Dragony, who was just tagging along for so-called protection. Feeling that she had just one-upped the Demon Queen, Violet flashed a mocking smile at Dragony. The Demon Queen was growing to hate Violet more and more. She asked if the human woman was trying to mock her, and Violet responded by teasing her even more. After walking around the city, the group settled in at an inn to spend the night and get some rest. It had gotten so late, and Louis just wanted to get a good night's rest. The problem was they only managed to secure 2 rooms. He went straight for one of the rooms, and Dragony enthusiastically followed suit while Violet was left out. Before turning in for the night, Louis asked the Demon Queen why she was following him. Using her cutest puppy dragon eyes, Dragony requested to share the room with Louis. Violet immediately objected to the idea, saying that the demon was pressuring him. Instead of Dragony, Violet claimed that she would be a more fitting companion. The queen immediately knew what this girl was trying to do, so she pulled her back by the hair. This quickly devolved into the 2 powerful women arguing about who would sleep with the skeleton man. Louis looked back at them, bickering, and sighed. He was too tired to entertain this. At the end of the day, the 2 women agreed on a truce and took the other room, leaving Louis in peace. It looked like neither of them had any plans of sleeping, staying up to watch each other for any sort of sneaky movements. Dragony continuously cursed at Violet for interrupting her plan to sleep with Louis. Uncomfortable with her cursing, Violet asked Dragony to stop being so vulgar. The queen just could not help it. She was supposed to be a bloodthirsty demon after all. Clicking her tongue, the queen still felt bitter that she could not sleep in the same bed as the skeleton man. As long as Violet was present, she might not be able to do so. Standing up to exert pressure, Dragony asserted that she did not need Violet's permission to act. Violet did not back down, even going as far as taking out her 1.5 blades. These 2 women in one room were like putting gunpowder near fire. They quickly resorted to fighting it out once again. They were both serious with their attacks too. Dragony mercilessly attacked with her claws, and Violet was no slouch either. Her speed and mastery over her body made her capable of keeping up with the most powerful demon in the world inside their tiny room. The queen's fist and Violet's foot eventually crossed paths, resulting in a massive boom of impact. Both women were lightly wounded, blood dripping from their shallow wounds. They had gotten so rowdy that they accidentally shattered one of the walls open. This was a place of business, but neither of them cared about the destruction. They found themselves on an entirely different floor as their fight was interrupted by a high-pitched scream. The 2 were so focused on their fight that they did not even notice that there was a couple doing some kinky stuff in the room they had broken into. Dragony was delighted to see such activities, and Violet embarrassingly lowered her head and covered her eyes. She slowly removed her hands, covering her sight, and saw Louis's empty room. The girls immediately set aside their conflict and barged in with worry. They could not find Louis in his room at all. Dragony reckoned that her master must be taking a short stroll nearby, but Violet was certain that this was not the case. Left inside the room were one of Louis's bones and his robe. She knew that man the best. Louis was not the type to go outside without his robe. The only plausible explanation she could think of was that Louis had been kidnapped right under their noses. Here's the text with the corrections applied. Just as Violet figured, Louis had been abducted and was now being transported in a carriage. Inside, he was still sleeping soundly. Not even being kidnapped was enough to wake him from his dreams. 2 quick-moving presences traversed the desert, trying their best to track down the man they loved. At this moment, Dragony dropped her pride and asked the human whether she had any idea where Louis might be taken. As far as Violet was aware, there was only one place where an oddity might be brought. The town's central auction house is located in the grim corner of Arcanus. Dragony only knew that auction houses were meant to be places where humans traded goods, but they pretty much traded everything in there as long as you could put a price tag on it. No one would ask or even try to find out where and how the auction items were acquired. All that mattered was whether the auction could put a price on it. It did not matter if the product was stolen or extorted from someone else. As long as the house profited, it could be sold. If the oddity made them money, then they would sell the hell out of it. That meant even a living being like Louis could be auctioned there. Even though his outer appearance might seem useless, You cannot argue the fact that the world is full of weird and crazy people with cash. Humans can be unhinged in many ways beyond a demon's imagination. Violet couldn't help but feel a little crazy herself. She was tagging along with Dragony, the demon queen after all. As soon as they got closer to the auction house, arrows started coming from different directions to thwart their advance. An arrow aimed at Violet almost got her, but she was fast enough to react and catch the thing in midair. Throwing the failed arrow away, the femme fatale duo slowed their advance to consider their next plan of action. The man who shot the arrow smiled and praised himself for such a good surprise attack. Still, that girl had surprisingly caught the arrow at such a distance. The culprits were the twin D-rank brothers named X and Tra. Both of them just happened to be attracted to Violet's beauty. Given that they confessed to liking the same girl at the same time, X and Tra argued for a moment. They cleared the situation up, clarifying that they both liked the purple-haired girl. Overhearing their conversation, Dragony felt left out. The twins' mother had always said that they should not fight over women, so the solution they came up with was to just kill the girl and be done with it. Instead of fighting amongst themselves, X and Tra resolved to be filial sons and listen to their mother's advice, eliminating the source of conflict. The one with the bow was X, and the one with the blades was Tra. Together, they were the most annoying extras. Just as they were finishing their villain monologue, Violet closed the distance and hacked the twins 100 times in a split second, without them even realizing what had just happened. She set her blades aside and urged Dragony to continue their advance to the auction house. The Demon Queen kicked the bodies on the ground while thinking of extracting some information first. Violet didn't want to waste any more time though, and those damn extras yapped too much. Seeing how determined she was to save Louis, Dragony concurred. From then on, it didn't take the ladies too long to reach the guarded main entrance of Arcanus Auction House. Inside, the auctioneer was enthusiastically hyping up the next covered item for the rich people to splurge their money on. He proudly stated that it was an item that belonged to the hero, known to be a dragon slayer. It was the soiled and stinky boxer shorts of the hero named Drovok, and it was a foul piece of fabric that looked like it came from the deepest depths of nasty hell. That didn't stop the buyers from raising their cards to obtain the only pair of boxers that Drovok had used throughout his heroic adventures though. The customers ranged from aristocrats and rich weirdos to princesses. They wanted those boxers that clearly went through a lot. After a heated bidding battle, they were finally sold for 25 golds. After carting off the nasty underwear, the auctioneer hyped the crowd for the next item that everyone had been waiting for. Slowly pulling the fabric covering the last item of the auction, the auctioneer could already hear the cash piling in. It was the portrait of the most handsome miscreant in the world, the man named Louis. Before the bidding war, he gave the customers a little history about how the pretty man embodied the essence of perfect beauty, a radiance so bright you would think it was God's will. Even monsters fall for his charm. Even though his personality was foul, akin to a miscreant, people who had encountered him would say that it was part of his charm. Just looking at the painting was enough to get the patrons hot and bothered. But the auctioneer was not done yet. Pulling away the fabric from another item, he announced that the buyer of the portrait would also receive the skeleton of the dead Louis to go along with it. Of course, the patrons would want to know if what was in front of them was truly Louis's skeleton. Inside the auctioneer's mind, he was just fooling the idiotic patrons who would believe everything he said. He had just bought these bones for no reason since they came into the town's inn a while ago. But how could the stupid patrons check if it was real? There was no way to accurately verify its authenticity, of course. With this, he could upcharge the portrait with an additional hint of credibility. He faced his patrons, looked them in the eyes, and guaranteed that they could have the legitimate remains of the most handsome man in the world. The auctioneer added that displaying the portrait and the remains would surely liven up the atmosphere at anyone's house. He added that Louis might be dead, but that didn't change the fact that he was right in front of them right now. This was a limited edition item that could never be bought again, unless the buyer was foolish enough to resell it. Finally, the Louis Special Edition would start at the astronomical price of 100 golds. As the price climbed from 300 to 500, the guards posted outside the auction house fell without putting up a decent fight. Seeing the cards of the patrons continuously driving up the price, the figure had already reached 600, 700, and eventually 800 golds. With the price reaching 800, the auctioneer started sweating as he asked if anyone would be willing to jump to 1,000. Among the crowd, a hooded figure raised his card as the price officially broke through the 3-figure mark. With that, the highest price in the entirety of the auction's history had been reached. If no one else was willing to drive up the figure, then they might have a winner. But before Mr. Auctioneer could formally finalize the deal, the main entrance of the auction house burst open so suddenly. The fat bastard was so close to getting the record high in sales when the explosion interrupted his glorious moment. Violet and the Demon Queen had come to ask the sons of bitches where they took Louis. Violet still didn't approve of Dragony cursing so much. The queen was too hopped up on adrenaline to be stopped. She just wanted to rescue her master. Looking forward to the spotlighted stage, they saw the pudgy auctioneer standing next to a displayed skeleton. Louis, their beloved, had been cruelly tied up on a wooden platform like some kind of trophy or animal. Dragony looked at this and did not hesitate to burst through the stairs and the patrons to rescue her master. Her unbelievably swift dash was cut off by a heavily armored knight brandishing his spear to stop her advance. Dragony simply demonstrated the gap in their strength by shattering the spear with her bare hand without batting an eye. Next came a bulky man wearing an executioner mask while wielding a flaming spiked ball. This time, Violet came through, still using her broken sword to respond accordingly to the threat. Sure, her blade might be short and broken, but it was more than enough to transmit her strength and shatter the heavy spiked ball of fire. As soon as she made contact with the weapon, a massive explosion was produced, making all the cowardly patrons scatter and retreat to the exits, fearing for their lives. Seeing as the explosion was concentrated on the battle, a few retreating patrons stopped in their tracks to check out if the intruder had been gotten rid of. But as the fire and smoke started dying down, the woman wearing the white top slowly emerged while standing upright. Dragony smiled and admitted that the auction's defenses were pretty strong, though not nearly as strong as her. When the queen laid eyes on Violet, she was taken aback for a moment. Violet had suffered through a few painful wounds from the explosion, but she was fine overall. Her eyes were still on the prize. The primary objective was focusing on saving Lord Lewis. She solemnly advised that the queen should take this mission seriously and never slack off. In this auction house, Violet could see countless nobles and rich people who came to splurge their wealth on whatever they pleased. With the presence of VIPs, it was only common sense that many strong warriors were working to protect them as well. There were A-rank mages, a spear knight, an apostate mage, and a former imperial knight ready to go. Violet turned to the demon queen, referring to her by her new name, Dragony, for the first time ever. She proposed that if she truly cared for Lord Louis from the bottom of her demon heart, then they should work together to protect him from now on. Dragony refused to do as Violet suggested. Instead of the queen helping Violet, she wanted Violet to help her instead. Even at this moment, the queen couldn't help being petty. To protect the man they both loved, they had no choice but to work together, even if they hated each other's guts. Since they both wanted the best for the guy, the collaboration of two of the most powerful women in the world would be a fearsome combination. Now that they weren't fighting against each other, the powerful experts hired by the rich snobs didn't stand a chance at all. Hellfire soared, and blades danced to slaughter those who stood in their way. Violet suddenly felt a trifling amount of magic coming from above her, courtesy of a mage utilizing his range and destructiveness effectively. The thunder spell didn't deal a killing blow, much to the mage's surprise. The two women looked unharmed, albeit a little tingly from the electricity. Mr. Auctioneer viewed the ladies as thieves wanting to steal from the auction house. He came to the stage holding a wooden hammer, slowly approaching the platform in the middle. Lewis was the main product of today's auction, but if the piece was putting his precious customers in danger, then perhaps it would be better to just get rid of the creepy thing altogether. Using the wooden hammer, the auctioneer swung and shattered the skeleton into 100 pieces. He was laughing inwardly as he put on the best acting of his life. If he had run away while the auction house was in chaos, the customers would never deal with him anymore. But his brave actions just now ensured that he would get even more customers from now on. He had already taken the real portrait of Lewis, stashing it to safety, and he believed that the skeleton was just a fake taken from the inn. Seeing Lord Lewis getting shattered piece by piece made the Demon Queen's anger soar to the high heavens. Looking up at the night sky, the moon turned a crimson color as the clouds spiraled around it. In conjunction with the abnormality in the sky, the earth began to rumble. Dragony's demonic power flared in full display. She promised to get Lord Lewis back to safety, but she had gotten too complacent and arrogant. With tears streaming down her face and Lucifer's eye in full effect, the queen proclaimed that everyone would die today. The queen's demonic power stretched from the moon and back, painting a horrific sight. An imperial guard from the Felton imperial family, commonly known as Storm Gyrex, peed his pants in horror. He looked up at the sky to see an apocalyptic view that made him lose control of his bladder. Ever since Gyrex came into this world, he thought he was the protagonist of the story, even though he was born poor. He had overwhelming power that awed even adults when he was just a kid. If he were the protagonist, his novel title would probably be Born Poor, I Alone Gained Fraudulent Mana Abilities. So, he took the elite course at the magic school and excelled there too. He rebuilt his family with his overwhelming power and talent. But today, in this auction house, he was finally experiencing what they truly meant by overwhelming power, a presence that would make geniuses pee their pants. The Demon Queen stared at poor Gyrex and ordered him to die. She was about to fling the hellish spell of destruction at the poor guy had it not been for another woman stopping the queen. Violet decided to step in and stop Dragony's rage-induced rampage. At the rate she was going, she would cause the collapse of the entire building. Infuriated, she asked Violet if she was okay with these people killing Lord Lewis mercilessly. Violet remained calm because she knew that Louis was not dead. It would take more than a wooden hammer to kill an immortal after all. If you looked closely at his bones, they were glowing with vigorous light. The ability he acquired after becoming a skeleton was Ultra Regeneration, a complete regeneration ability on a different level from your run-of-the-mill healing magic. Realizing that she was acting out of anger far too quickly, Dragony dispelled the annihilation skill she was cooking up. If her master was alive, then there was no need to overreact. But she would not let the crooked fat bastard get away with his sins. As long as she did not collapse the building, letting the auctioneer have it should not be a problem. Violet concurred. She had always been a big proponent of punishing people who tried to pluck the flower. Using her dual blades, Violet juggled the auctioneer in the air while bleeding him out with 1,000 cuts. She even took out multiple knights in the process. The bearded Thunder Mage was still hanging around in the background, trying to get some free hits in the chaos. Violet had stopped speaking, solely focusing on maximizing pain and destruction for her enemies. She was seriously angry. She could picture Louis asking her to save him, and the feeling of guilt for not living up to his trust was fueling her rage. Adding to that the despair of not being able to protect the flower the first time around, her heart and mind were in turmoil. The only way she could vent her anger was through the slaughter of the bastards who dared to stop her from saving Louis. She gave herself until Louis could finally regenerate to go crazy. And go crazy she did. Her eyes were filled with malice and even joy at the sight of the blood she spilled. Dragony watched Violet from the side, speechless at her ferocity and cruelty. She found Violet's movements strange. She knew that this lady was clearly human, but she emitted a more sinister aura than that of a demon as she slashed through flesh with her broken blades. Touching the wound on her chest, the queen had a feeling that Violet was not showing her full abilities in their previous fight. She must admit that the thought of that was frightening. If she fought the current Violet, she couldn't guarantee victory, no matter how strong she was. Dragony caught herself feeling fear for a human. She was once the most powerful demon king in history. Behind her were some pesky experts planning a sneak attack. She reminded herself that she was still the black dragon Atrox, a being who stood at the peak of the demon world as the three sneaky experts mounted their three-pronged attack. Unleashing her demonic aura, she refused to lose against Violet's display of vengeance. Even though her horn and strength had not fully regenerated yet, she wanted Violet to see that her titles were no joke. She swore to save her master first, and she would do just that. With an insane smile on her face, she yelled at the ugly bastards to give her master back. Noticing the increase in her power, Violet could not help but spare a glance. She noticed one crazy thing that Dragony had been doing back in their battle. And even now, except for what she deems fatal wounds, the queen does not dodge any attacks at all. That demon fights as if she is not afraid of death at all. Violet swore that she would risk her life for Lord Louis. But seeing how far Dragony was going for her master, Violet was starting to think that she might have less determination than the queen. The auctioneer Dapara, a dishonorably discharged imperial knight kicked out for corruption and bribery, clumsily picked up a blade and carefully snuck behind the momentarily distracted Violet. He burst into her space, intending to take her life as payment for all the chaos and damage to his auction house. His dumbass mouth could not stay shut as he charged in, giving Violet plenty of time to respond to the pathetic assassination attempt. In his perspective, he got her good. He managed to get a clean slash off to slice her supple body. He viewed her as an insignificant thing acting all cocky, but that was just his delusion speaking. He did not get her, but she got him. A single fatal slice to the neck finally ended his miserable life. Violet did not even bother turning around. Her eyes were glued on the Demon Queen's battle. Watching the demon fight gave her an unexpected enlightenment, so for that, she was thankful. She could feel the potential to get stronger for the sake of Lord Louis now. While lost in her own thoughts, Violet felt the growing demonic aura spike up even higher. Turning around, the sinister power surrounding the queen had flared to a massive degree. Dragony looked like she was going berserk, out of control from pushing too hard. Violet noticed that the queen might have pushed a little too hard and too fast to keep her terrifying power under control. At this rate, the area would be at risk of getting destroyed once again. Under the bright moonlit night of Arcanus, Louis found himself whole again. The process of being put back together by his mysterious regenerative power was quite jarring. Thankfully, the ladies managed to keep things under control, and they were there to greet their lord as soon as he woke up. They looked a little banged up, but they were more concerned about Louis. He looked around, and it looked like they were back in the room at the inn. Louis found it incredibly odd. Maybe it was a dream, but he could vividly remember feeling like he was somewhere else. Violet asserted that he must have had a nightmare or something while Dragony offered him a drink to clear his head. While the drink got wasted on his skeleton body, he asked why the ladies looked so busted. The wall behind them was hastily plastered together while he asked if they fought again. Violet denied the accusation, even though there were signs of destruction on the walls and on their faces. Surprisingly, Dragony owned up to being the culprit who broke the wall. She reasoned that she failed to control her strength and went on a blind rampage. She also credited Violet for calming her down, and that was all that happened. Louis turned to Violet for confirmation, and she did. After making sure that Louis was fine, the ladies got out and went straight to their shared room. The Demon Queen was yawning left and right, obviously sleepy from all the fighting just a few hours ago. Violet came up to her to ask why she had lied about all the fighting and how she was going out of control. Violet thought that the demon must be trying to make her see her in a better light by catching the blame. So, she asserted that she still viewed the queen as a dangerous creature. Dragony did not care about that though. Suddenly, she tossed something towards Violet, and she instinctively caught it in her hand. Opening her hand, it turned out to be a neatly packed pouch of ointment for injuries. Dragony walked a little faster after handing Violet the ointment, adding that she was not the type of gal who could live with debts hanging over her head. It was quite unbelievable to see, but it seemed like the Demon Queen was actually worried about Violet a little bit. The morning came, And unlike the auction house last night, the inn inside Arcanus was as peaceful as could be. Lewis got up early to have his cup of hot coffee, stirring it carefully while taking in the aroma. He took a sip of the caffeine goodness. Of course, it only spilled out of his skeleton frame like usual. After finishing his nonsensical morning coffee, he put it down on the bedside table and saw one of his bones lying around. He looked at that limb and confirmed that what he felt last night was not a dream. Those mischievous girls actually lied to him about something. But even though they lied, he knew that Dragony and Violet had protected him somehow. That was why their faces were all bruised and wounded like that. They got badly hurt because of him. They went through a hellish experience for him, and he would have to live with that. Looking at his bony limbs, a complicated emotion welled up inside Lewis. Sure, he proclaimed that he would do whatever it took to get his looks back. The Queen and Violet wholeheartedly pledged their allegiance to him, doing whatever they could to help him with his mission. He didn't force them, they offered to help first. So why were his tears flowing down from his non-existent tear ducts? He tried to force himself to stop feeling guilty and just keep his eyes on the prize. He was selfish and only thought about himself. At least, that's how it started off. Maybe that was starting to change. His self-reflection was interrupted by the girls banging on his window. Violet was outside looking frantic while telling him that something terrible had happened. She professed that the Queen had suffered from a high fever all night and eventually lost control of her demonic power. In the process, she transformed back into her dragon form and wreaked havoc. Concerned about Dragony, Lewis jumped out of the window, demanding to see Dragony swiftly. He was in such a rush to get to her side that his head fell off, but that did not stop him from looking for the Queen. Louis and Violet ran through the streets of Arcanus, trying to reach their comrade. He was actually looking forward to seeing the Demon King Dragon once again. With her dragon form, finding the solution to his problem would only be a matter of time. They ran and ran until they made a turn onto a street where children were crying their eyes out. He was looking forward to seeing a massive beast that could destroy everything in its path, only to see an unruly kid kicking sandcastles at a playground sandbox. His visions of riding a dragon to hasten his mission immediately